All right, I think we can call this to order. First, I'd like to thank everyone for choosing to be here today as opposed to the affirmation rally. We appreciate your presence, and feel free to move up since this seems to be wide open. Okay, a little bit about the process. We collected staff input via anonymous Google form, Chancellor's survey, and a couple other surveys, and we ranked topics and questions that seem to be most important to people. And so this is how we determine what the basic 10 questions for today are. So this was crowdsourcing. There will be time for some Q&A after we go through the main group of questions. And there are cards available for everyone to start filling them out, and there will be a point later in the session where people will be asked to pass them to the end of the aisle. They'll be collected and sorted for the very end. Basic, important housekeeping questions. The bathrooms are out on the right, then turn left at the exit sign, and they'll be on the left. That's also where the water is. And for anyone who has cell phones or anything else that beeps, whistles, makes noise, or makes any kind of dramatic light show, please turn that off during the session. Just turn the ringer, beeper, or whatever off, and you're free to turn them back on again when they're done. So thank you very much for being here. And now to take on the rest of the program, I guess we should announce that this time we are having sign language interpretation. This is part of a big step forward in trying to make these informational sessions accessible to as many people as we can. So bear with us. We're trying this, and we hope to go better from here forward because leadership really does want to be in communication with all of us. So we're showing willing. And now our moderator, the able Rebecca Anderson.
Look at that, and applause as well. We're starting on a good note, everybody. Yes, like Elizabeth was saying, we'll have some questions at the beginning, and I'll let you know when we're going to have those questions on your note cards passed to the side for collection. So I'll start by introducing our panelists very briefly, and then they will give some opening statements that will provide context into their areas and what they might talk about today. So on your right, far from me, we have Professor Kel Christ, who's the Interim Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost. Thank you. Next, we have Peggy Houston, the Chief Operating Officer for Campus Shared Services. In the middle, we have Scott Biddy, Vice Chancellor. And then we have Rosemary Ray, Associate Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer for campus. Thank you all for joining us. And now, should I call on somebody, or do we have a volunteer for the first opening statement? Excellent.
First, thank you for coming today. Good morning. I wanted to begin by acknowledging what a difficult moment this is nationally for us. How difficult it is for many of us in our community who feel marginalized, who feel they don't understand their country. I know many of us might be in Sproul Plaza if we weren't here in the demonstration of solidarity and community, and it felt wrong to begin without acknowledging all of that. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to acknowledge what a difficult time it is for us institutionally in a somewhat larger time frame. As I've reflected on our situation, I think this is a bigger crisis for Berkeley than any time since the free speech movement. And that crisis has a number of dimensions. First, of course, there's the financial crisis. But this is more than a set of budget cuts. It's a rather painful, dislocating change in our financial model. And it's a change in which we're going to need all members of the community to help us think through. We also have a very large number of interims and positions, including me and Scott. And so the leadership structure feels really unstable. And that leaves a lot of people wondering when the next shoe is going to drop, who is making decisions, and how they're getting made. So I read in the questions that were sent to us beforehand lots of concerns about communication. And I wanted to acknowledge in beginning that some of the issues of communication have to do with the historical moment at which we find ourselves. I hope we can make this all better. but it always seems to me a good idea to begin by acknowledging what's going on in the present.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Down the line? Thank you, Peggy.
I'm going to use notes. I have a lot to say, and I'll try to say it in just a few minutes. But first, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to the Berkeley Staff Assembly for having me today. I'm honored to be a part of this panel, and I'm also honored to represent the staff at CSS today. I wanted to provide just a few highlights on priorities that we are working on now at CSS, and beginning with, first and foremost, our ongoing operations. To start with, I wanted to present some statistics of just the volume of work that we do at CSS. On a monthly basis, in business and financial services, we're processing an average of 12,000 procurement and 3,600 travel and entertainment transactions. In HR, a monthly average of about 14,000 HR transactions, as well as hundreds of interactions with units, supervisors, managers, and Berkeley employees like yourself. In IT, an average of 6,000 tickets or calls monthly. And then in RA, or research administration, an average of about 250 proposals that we're preparing monthly, as well as managing about $49 million in grant dollars. In addition to ongoing operations, we have several priority projects that we're working on. The first is implementing ServiceNow in CSS HR. It is an application that we already use in CSS IT, as well as other areas of the campus in IT. So why is this a priority for CSS HR? Most importantly, it's through automation of manual processes that ServiceNow is going to help us improve upon the effective handling of HR requests. It will also give campus visibility into HR requests so they can see where that request is and what's happening with it. And then lastly, it also prepares us to transition in the future to UCPath, which is scheduled for December of 2018. The second project I'd like to touch on is the Research Administration End-to-End Initiative. CSS is an eager participant in this initiative and in collaborating with our other partners who participate in research administration. And they include the academic units, the Sponsored Projects Office, the Contracts and Grants Accounting Office, and Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliance Office, as well as the Vice Chancellor of Research and his office. In this initiative, there are 3 work streams. The first is process improvement. The second is service interface, also known as regional model. And the third is culture. So I'm going to touch on all 3 of these just briefly. In the process area, we've reviewed award setup over the summer, identified where we want to make some improvements, and those improvements are now being implemented. The second process review will focus on proposal preparation, and that has just kicked off and will occur over the next couple of months, where they will identify what improvements they want to make and then implement those improvements. The second area, the service interface, otherwise known as regional model, there's been a committee identified, and that committee has begun meeting. We are charged, and I am a member of this committee, we are charged with proposing a recommendation for a pilot that would test out some ideas about how best to structure the service interface to faculty and departments for all research administration services provided by the central offices, and those are those offices I mentioned just a minute ago. We've been asked to make this recommendation by mid-December, and if this sounds vague, it is, because the charge of this committee is to identify what the specifics are, so we'll have more information when we get to December. And then the third area, culture. What is meant by this? A positive campus culture plays a key role in successfully working together to compete for and to manage research. And so to ensure that we have a focus on culture, a committee will be formed in the next month or so and will be charged with identifying what aspects of our culture do we want to leverage to make this initiative successful, and what other aspects might we want to influence some change with. And then a third priority area in CSS is continuous improvement. We've implemented what we refer to as continuous improvement boards that are physically located throughout CSS, where frontline staff are doing the work to gather on a regular basis and propose ideas about how we can improve our processes. We believe that the folks at the front line that are actually doing the work are the ones that have the best ideas about how we might improve that work. So all of CSS are encouraged to participate in this continuous improvement effort. And then finally, I just wanted to make a comment and to take this opportunity to share with you that Berkeley is seen as a pioneer in developing a shared services model that meets the needs of the campus and the financial constraints of our campus. As an example, we had a group this week from University of Colorado at Boulder come to visit CSS. They're just initiating a shared service center, and they came to Berkeley as part of their research. Almost monthly for the past 2 years that I've been in CSS, I have a visit or a phone call from another university that is embarking on the very challenging task of transitioning their campus to a shared service center. The financial challenges that we face here at Berkeley are not unique in higher ed. In fact, universities across the country and around the world are facing these same challenges. And Berkeley is viewed as having made major progress in the area of facing these challenges and continuously improving upon our changes once we've started them. And that's in spite of our leadership turnover. And leadership turnover is another issue that so many universities have faced. When I'm asked how Berkeley has continued to make progress, I attribute this to the dedicated staff at Berkeley who are committed to the mission and continue to look for and work toward solutions that work for all of us. It's ironic that we here at Berkeley, when we're in the midst of change, as we have been now for 6 years, if we go back to the beginning of OE, it's difficult for us to see the progress that we've made, but an outside source that's looking at us and has been watching over the years sees what we've been able to accomplish. So I just want to thank you all for your participation in the success of shared services to date and your ongoing collaboration to continue to define what we want shared services to be and then to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Scott, I think you're in the hot seat next.
Yes, indeed. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I think this is a very valuable forum and one that I've been looking forward to because these kinds of communications, I think, are critical in tapping into what is most meaningful about our experiences here working at Berkeley. I have been here almost 15 years, and I just every day am inspired by the way in which the staff of this institution are so committed to the mission and values of this institution. And I think that is ultimately what is at the really heart of and the essence of what it means to be Berkeley. Having said all that, it is an anxious and uncertain time, and I feel it every day, as I know all of you do. And one of the things that I want to echo from what Carol said, which I think is so important, is that during these difficult times, it's even more important to make decisions and to make them in principled ways and to make them in as transparent a way as we can so that we can move forward through these difficulties. And I don't want to put too heavy a burden on Carol's shoulder, but I have been just inspired by her leadership, and I think my work with her has been extraordinarily meaningful. And in fact, it gives me a great sense of hope and optimism for the future. These are difficult times, and we will have to make difficult decisions. But through that, I am absolutely convinced that because of the quality of people associated with this institution and because of that commitment to our mission and values, as we emerge on the other side of this, I'm just absolutely convinced Berkeley will still be Berkeley in the ways that we know it and in the ways that we care about it. And so I look forward to working with all of you as we try to move forward.
Thank you. Last but certainly not least, we have Rosemary.
Well, the great thing about going last is I can just say ditto.
Exactly.
But I thought I would just talk for a second because I've had many conversations with BSA in the spring. And that commitment to partnership with our staff has not changed. And to echo something that both Carol and Scott said, and the era of uncertainty that we are living and working in, for many of us in the room, we don't have the luxury of operating with uncertainty. We keep the trains moving. We keep people being paid. We pay our vendors. We serve our faculty. We serve our students. So we have to act with a higher degree of courage, I think, as staff members, and I applaud you for that. The steady hand that I see you applying with our faculty and students in particular, and the respect that you share with each other. And so I think there's some good things that are happening too. As it relates to uncertainty, I can see around the corner, perhaps, and we are a resilient organization. We've been here for almost 150 years. We will be here in 150 more, and that there is a plan, that we are tackling our financial sustainability. And as difficult as that is, we really are making progress against that. I'll end by saying that as difficult a year as 16-17 is, that 17-18 will also be a difficult year for us. And we're going to continue to have to find ways to reduce our cost structure, but more importantly, make investments in revenue generation as we look ahead. And I really look forward to our continued partnership in finding those solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. This is it's fantastic to have the opportunity to have such an open discussion with leadership. So I really appreciate you all. Now we can get into some of the questions that we crowdsourced from everyone. And I want to start with a question about communication. Carol touched on this a little bit. I think it's a topic that comes up often. As staff, we often can hear major campus news from outside media sources before we have heard anything from our own administration. I know that many of you are probably remembering some of those instances that happened over the last year. We might receive Cal messages, but they can seem to gloss over major decisions, or we read lengthy notes that can feel a little purposefully vague. So as staff members who are often directly affected by some of these leadership messages, I think there's always a push and an ask for communication to be timely, authentic, and relevant. You all touched on this a little bit, but can you address this need a little bit further? And what are some of the things that might be happening to bring communication into this area?
Thank you very much. I really identified with this question because before I was the IEVCP, I was the director of the Center for Studies in Higher Education, and I felt exactly about campus communications as this question reflects. And as someone who studies English, I think it's really interesting to think about the reasons for things. We live in a world of so many different channels of communication that it's really hard. It's not like the simple email world of maybe 15 years ago where people just expected things to come through one channel. And everybody feels they have an individual channel to get to news media, often before their own organization has determined how to represent a situation. So that is all to say we live in a very, very complex and noisy communications landscape that is confusing. We also, my experience in administration is that often there are so many fingers or pens in a message, by the time that it's completed and ready to go, it doesn't say anything. Because there's so much both caution and so many people trying to wordsmith it that it loses the sense of authentic voice and concision. You can help us by telling us what form of communication is the best for you. That would be really helpful. We're also going to hire an internal communications person in In the Public Affairs Office, we haven't had such a person, so I think that will be a good thing. I see somebody silently clapping their hands with that. And I can just pledge for myself that I believe that candid, direct communication always gets us further, even when we disagree, and that's the way I want to communicate, will communicate, and can pledge that I will continue to communicate in that way. It's a frustrating issue that's not just about our particular university. I think it's characteristic of many large and complex organizations, but we can and will do better.
Thank you. And if anyone is wondering how you can get the message to leadership about what type of communication is best, I think they spoke often about their interactions with staff organizations. So BSA is a great place to be involved. CSAC, Chancellor Staff Advisory Committee. There's many outlets. I hope you all explore those. So I think if I asked everyone in the audience to raise their hand if they've heard "do more with less," we'd see everyone's hand up. And often, this is a hard thing to keep hearing over the years. Is there a way we can shift the conversation so that leadership stops saying, or it stops feeling like we're being asked to do more with less, but instead we can work collaboratively together to decide which programs or services that we need to reduce or eliminate it? And for staff, who is the voice of the staff on this issue, and how can we ensure staff concerns are actually being escalated to the right decision makers?
So thank you. I have heard that comment for the 15 years that I've been here, that we're always doing more with less. And in fact, for a long time, we have been doing increasingly more with less. So I think the question is very authentic, and I take it in the spirit in which it's offered. The one thing that I would say is that the nature of our challenges are significant, and so we will have to use every tool in the toolbox in order to try to get to the other side of the current challenges that we have. But it would be, I think, just foolish to believe that doing more with less will solve the problems that we're currently experiencing. I hope that in each of your areas, with your coworkers and with the managers who you work with, that you will continue to look for ways that we can be more efficient and that we can get things done. But that is not going to solve the problem. And so I think the embedded in the question is this notion that we also have to do less, that there are ways in which we have to look at the nature of our work and prioritize. And I would say that most of the conversations that we have at various leadership fora is really the question of how do we make difficult trade-offs and how do we set priorities. Just yesterday we had a meeting of the Capital Projects Committee, and as you must realize, there is an unending list of capital needs for the campus, and it's just clear that we cannot do all of them. So we do need mechanisms to determine how do we set these priorities and how do they support our mission and values. Having said all that, the other thing that I think we have learned, if we didn't already know it, is that top-down decision-making rarely results in decisions that ultimately have the effect that we want them to have. Of course, decisions do have to get made at the top, and ultimately an organization that doesn't make decisions and difficult decisions will grind to a halt, and I think none of us will like the result of an indecisive organization. But decisions have to get made at every level of the organization, and I think we have to be aware of the ways in which individual decisions cascade throughout our campus. And so one of the things that I think we often do, and in fact I think we're very good at doing, is optimizing locally. And so for those of us who are on a team, we have a particular view of the world, and we set some priorities, and we begin to understand how to move things forward. And and I've done it myself, and what we often fail to recognize is that we can optimize something locally that may be extremely suboptimal in another local environment. And so that leads to a place where I think all of us have to be very conscientious about the decisions that we each make every day and how we do our work, and trying to be a bit more expansive in understanding how those decisions affect the people around us. And I think we have to model that in our leadership of the campus, and that is we have to be really sensitive to the way that the decisions that are posed to us and the way that we gather information in the process of making those decisions is effective in accounting for the very complex ways in which these decisions will play out through the organization. Now, I would like to be able to tell you, well, just send me an email, and if you have a good idea or if you have a problem, and I'll try to solve it. I'm barely getting through the emails I have right now, and so I'm not sure it would be particularly helpful, but still, I'll do the best I can. I would say more importantly, it's important to continue to work within the structure of our organization. And that is, when you are working in your areas, continuing to be in conversation with your coworkers and with your managers, and then making sure that your managers are taking the difficult issues and moving them through the organization so that they get into the decision-making model that we hope will be more expansive and more accommodating of a broader set of views.
Thank you.
Carol, you might want to add to that, I think.
Actually, as you were talking, Scott, this kind of gets us toward another question. I was going to wait to say this until then, but since you've given me an opportunity, I think a lot of our challenge is not doing more with less, it's doing more with more. But that requires a considerable reorientation as we think about new kinds of activities that are going to enhance revenues and diversify our sources of revenue. So we can talk a little bit more about that later. But there is a phrase that I heard, or a sentence that I heard, formulation that I heard at a conference that I went to over the summer about the finances of liberal arts colleges. And it was, you can't cut your way to heaven, but you can spend your way to hell. And I don't believe that the way out of our current situation is cutting. It's revenue generation. That is going to require lots of creativity on lots of people's parts, and it is going to be doing more with more.
Well said.
Well, I feel I must respond to that. I see some of my team members in the room, and we have gone through the exercise of many times of trying to figure out what we can stop doing. And this is a place in which I think your assistance would be very valuable. I think what we found was that we were replicating in instances in which we had sort of system problems. We wanted to validate what was happening in HCM by running another process in BIBS PRT, and we were sort of doing the same work twice instead of sort of buckling down and solving some of the problems that we were experiencing in source systems. So I think we all have had that experience, and when you see that, we kind of get used to it. Lots and lots of workarounds, but I really would encourage you to raise that with your managers because we get desensitized, and keep raising it. If you're doing it in this system and you're also doing it in that system, we really need to continue to figure out how we can just do it in one place moving forward.
Yeah, if I might add to what Rose has said, as most of you know, I was provost here in the 1990s. And it's been fascinating to me to come back to the campus after spending 15 years away. And one of the things I've observed is how much more complex the bureaucracy is. I think needlessly complex. We're a complex organization. There's going to be complexity here. But in part because I think we don't trust each other, in part because we live in a very, an environment in which undertaking risk seems very costly. We have lots and lots of checks on what we do, and that's expensive. And I know that people have said this over and over again, and you're probably tired of hearing it, but we do need to cut through and simplify some of the layers of repetitive process that surround some of some of the most fundamental activities in which we engage.
We simplify. One of our operating principles reminds me.
We simplify, yes.
Yep. because we're on this topic, let's stay on this topic a little bit longer with the revenue generation that I think we were alluding to. Because you've talked, all of you, I think, have talked about how revenue generation is important to the campus financial plan. Can you provide an update for us on the philanthropy effort fundraising 2.0? And what are some of the goals for this fiscal period for university development and alumni relations? Excuse me.
Okay, so this is a little bit about doing more with more.
Yes.
We imposed a 5% gift tax up from 2.5%. This is to hire more fundraisers so we can raise more money. Raising money is in part a product of how many people you have doing it. We also have not been doing it as effectively as we might. We're a little bit of a Johnny-come-lately to the fundraising game. Our first major comprehensive capital campaign for the campus was in the late 1980s. And we have in the past raised money mostly for buildings or mostly for nice things on the side, kind of nice extras. We really have to change that and raise money like the privates do for the core. For financial aid for our students, for faculty positions. There is a wonderful chart that Rich Lyons, the dean of the school, the Haas School, presents. I'm not sure I'm going to get everything right, but he has 4 quadrants in which gifts can fall. And one of them is a budget relieving gift. The other is the kind of gift that keeps on taking, the gift that costs you money to take because you have to do all these other things. And so thinking about our philanthropy, not as these are nice things that we can now do that we didn't used to do, but rather philanthropy as a very important revenue source for the campus that enables us to change the source of income that is funding certain operations is very critical. We're currently in the planning phase of a major capital campaign. I, together with Julie Morgan Hooper, sent a letter to every unit on the campus that wants to raise money saying, how much do you want to raise? And what do you want to raise it for? That one-pagers have all come back. I've got a thick notebook like this full of one-pagers. Julie and I, taking bets about how much they would sum to. We think this is a $5 billion campaign. I thought 10 billion. Julie thinks 15 billion they would sum to. So we have some, careful work to do to try to determine which of our fundraising goals is going to most help the campus at this moment where we have to shift our financial model to depending much more on revenues. But Scott, you know so much about development.
Well, I appreciate
you
saying.
I'm sure you can add to what I've said.
I agree completely with what you've said. The one thing I think I would add, going back to an earlier comment I made, is I think fundraising is a very good example of where we often optimize locally at the expense of the whole. And so one of the things that I think Julie is working really hard to do is to try to build a more collaborative model for fundraising that is still remains decentralized in fundamental ways, but has higher degrees of collaboration and coordination. Because I think what our donors experience is a place that feels very disjointed and where they get requests that don't seem coordinated and that don't actually reflect a sense of overarching purpose and meaning. And so I think as we go into the next campaign, the culture around philanthropy is going to be a really important part of what makes that campaign successful, not just in reaching a dollar goal, because I have great confidence that our donor community will step up to support the campus. But we not only need to raise a particular amount of money, but we need for that money to go to work for the campus in ways that will really help us continue to be the institution that we want to be.
That's right.
I'm surprised no one mentioned we have the Big Give coming up as well. So this is a moment for all staff to participate in the philanthropy efforts as well.
Here, here.
Thursday, November 17th, I believe, next Thursday. Big Give. You can give as little or as much as you would like. I will be giving. I challenge all of you to do as well. If you give $10, your schools or institutions might go up on the leader ranking board. It's actually quite fun. Can further you to give more and more and more. My husband had to stop me last year. Take away my credit card. He's like, you work there. So this is great, hearing about the philanthropy efforts. I know that there's also important revenue generation initiatives going on in the non-philanthropy area. I wonder if somebody could speak on that.
I'd be happy to define them. We have 6 categories of revenue generation that we're working with. One of them is philanthropy. We've already talked about those. But the other 5 are enrollment. Basically, colleges and universities are in the business of taking in students who pay them tuition. And so most colleges and universities, when they find themselves in a financially challenging situation, will think about enrollment as one of their most important levers. Enrollment means not just the students that the Office of the President asks us to take as part of our enrollment target. We have a very healthy summer session that still has capacity. We have university extension. Both of those are areas where we can significantly grow both enrollments and revenues in the short term. Again, doing more with more. In addition, we have a new opportunity in self-supporting degree programs. I've been giving a set of programs, afternoon programs, on revenue generation for chairs and deans. We had one just last night on self-supporting degree programs. These are master's and professional programs, certificates that are self-supporting and indeed are a source of revenue for the campus. Higher education is changing. We have, for the first time this year, more master's than PhD students on campus, and that change is probably going to accelerate. And the master's degree is now a kind of requirement of entry for many, many job fields. Berkeley becoming a leader in this market makes educational sense, it makes mission sense, and it makes financial sense. So developing more self-supporting degree programs is a second. Third is monetizing our real estate. We have a lot of land which is not working as hard for us as it could. We also have a really terrible, kind of crippling housing shortage for just about every population on campus. So monetizing real estate. Fourth is increasing contract and grant activity, and fifth is more entrepreneurial activities. So those are the revenue categories that we're working on, and we're trying to set not budget reduction targets for our schools and colleges, but revenue targets for our schools and colleges.
Great. Peggy, you gave us great insight into campus shared services earlier, and you talked a little about how CSS might evolve over the next few years. And I think one of the questions that came in and that comes up is, how will services look like, and how will they change for the people in this room? How will the model be funded? And you talked about culture as well. There was a recent CSS staff opinion survey, and what did the results show, and how do you plan to incorporate that?
Okay, so let's take
it's a lot of different areas.
Yeah. So let's start with the evolution of processes. So I do think that we as a campus are evolving in how we look at our administrative services, and we are beginning to look more holistically, and the research administration end-to-end initiative is an example of that. If we only look at CSS, we're not going to solve the larger problem. We really need to look at all of the processes involved in any specific area. So I think that we will be doing more of assessing what is the campus need for the administrative operation, and then that determines what is the service that administrative units will be providing to the campus, and that determines, of course, then what CSS's part in that is. So that's one area where I think it's evolving. And another area where I think it's evolving and we need to see more evolution is in leveraging technology in our processes. So I also mentioned ServiceNow is one area where we are automating some of the work that we do manually now that can be automated. And there's a benefit there for the campus of getting a better service, that we have less errors if we can automate it and automate it well. There's also another factor that plays in there, and that is that we currently rely on a lot of information that is in the heads of our fellow staff that have been on campus for a long time. And that model has worked for a number of years because people did come to work for Berkeley and stay here for quite a while. As we look at the newer people coming into our workforce, they tend not to stay as long. And so it's really important that we are capturing that institutional knowledge and unit knowledge in a way that we can quickly transition that from one person to the next and continue to give good service to our units across the campus. So those are the points I would make around evolution of service. The second question there was about the funding of CSS. I don't have any update on a funding model, but I don't know if Rosemarie wants to say anything about that.
Well, I'll only say that Paul Alvasados, the Vice Chancellor of Research, challenged us to really look at how research administration is delivered here at Berkeley. And it launched 1,000 ships, and that we're looking at all of the business processes all the way through. So in the example of research administration, the Sponsored Projects Office, CSS, and then what ends up happening in contract grants accounting. And I think what we are discovering is that we are very open to new ideas surrounding service delivery. So we are thinking about a regional model, how we can get services closer to the academic units that they serve. So we're sort of we're in a discovery stage, and I think it'll probably take us another 6 or 7 months to really financially model where we're headed.
Thank you. And then the last piece there was, we did conduct a survey in shared services. I think it was called the CSS Opinion Survey.
I think so.
Yeah. But it kind of gave us a feel for the climate right now in shared services, and it does reflect an organization that's in transition. So some of the responses came back, and there are people that are still moving from what their environment and the work was before CSS. They're still moving through that transition and letting go of what was their past. And then we've got people that are kind of in the middle, and they're adjusting, but it's a big adjustment to make, and things aren't perfect yet, and there's a lot of frustration where we want things to work really well. The staff want things to work really well and be able to deliver good services, and we're not there yet, and that gets really frustrating. And then third, there are people that are really excited about the change that's happening on campus right now, because it really does represent opportunities for staff and a different future, a different way of doing business on campus. So there are people that are also very excited about what the future holds. This survey was taken in, I think around June or maybe even early July. And so it also reflected that there were concerns at that time that there was a disconnect between the leadership in CSS and the executive leadership of the campus. And since then, the chancellor has been to visit us at CSS, talk about the important role that CSS is playing on the campus, that CSS is here for the long term, but we do need to continually improve upon the services that we are providing, the quality of the services that we are providing to the campus. And then lastly, I'll just quickly say that survey was sent out. The results of the survey were sent. I sent to all CSS staff with a note in September. So they did get that back, and then my intention is that we will do that survey on an annual basis now, so that we can see where we are making changes and where we still need to make changes.
Thank you. And thank you for navigating a complex question.
I might add just one thing on that, and that is, 7 months ago I was a CSS client, and now I'm Peggy's close colleague. And the thing that I've really learned from looking at what has happened in this development of our campus shared services model is just, there is a lot of change fatigue on the campus. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't mean that we can stop changing. We have to continue to change, but I think I wouldn't speak for my leadership colleagues, but I think for me personally, the thing I've come to realize is that it is so easy to underestimate the cultural impact of those changes, the financial impact of those changes, and how long it takes for change to actually find its way into sound, solid processes. And I think as we look at the path forward, we just have to be very sobered by every decision we make that projects more change onto our campus and its staff members. We will have to do it, but we have to take it very seriously and have a kind of a sober attitude about it.
You know, Scott, I was thinking that as part of CSS, in many ways, people changed jobs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At the same time that was happening, we synthesized hundreds and hundreds of policies and procedures. And importantly, we also changed our systems, like all at the same time. And I think what we can see is that the systems are stabilizing and maturing, which has given us a lot of relief, and that folks are sort of in their right roles, mm-hmm. and we're still working out the procedures, yeah. But it's not as if we're drinking out of the big fire hose anymore.
That's right.
Peggy, you mentioned that there's institutional knowledge often in staff members. Mm-hmm. And this is another one of our topic areas that came up. There can be seen from staff a brain drain happening where many of our colleagues with that deep institutional knowledge are taking jobs elsewhere or retiring earlier than planned. As somebody who works in career services, I'm all for people getting new and exciting careers, whether they be on campus or off campus. But at the same time, there's important points to consider about retaining valuable employees during this period of uncertainty, making sure that we have those pathways and ladders for career advancement, and the transition and succession planning that you mentioned for an institution where it can take years to kind of figure out how to do that. Yeah. So I was hoping somebody, Peggy, or I didn't mean to put you in the hot seat, somebody else perhaps as well, to address this both the career ladders portion of brain drain and then also this transition and succession planning that needs to happen.
I can make a few comments about
Please.
CSS, but then others can make it more broader for the campus. But in CSS, this is a very serious issue, or an issue that we take very seriously, is to think about retention of our employees and our staff. And we have seen a brain drain especially over the past year. And so I think first is working with I have been in conversation with the executive leadership of the campus of how serious this issue is, and that, again, this kind of gets to that culture piece that I mentioned in the research administration end-to-end, that we have to be working together as a campus to solve the problems that we're facing, and that we need to be cognizant of the impact of these changes, as Rosemarie said, on staff, and be thinking about what the impact is to the work that the staff are doing. So I think that we're thinking in all different directions. In CSS, I'm also working with our managers and supervisors to think about what we can do to retain staff, what is going to make the biggest difference for them. They are proposing ideas that are coming forward to our leadership team to decide on, and they will be implementing that. So there's a number of things, a number of paths that we're taking of thinking about that. And then also, I think in CSS recruiting, I asked, in response to seeing this question, I asked recruiting, what are they doing when they're trying to recruit employees to the campus, and how are they selling why UC Berkeley is a desirable place to come and work. And I'll mention just a couple of things that they had on their list here. They talk about the diverse environment that we have here, the community partnership that we have here at Berkeley, talent development, and career mobility. And career mobility, the job that I'm in right now is the 6th job that I've had at UC Berkeley. So in my own experience, I've been able to, and this is not where shared services is not where I started. I started in IT, so I'm in a completely different place from where I was 16 years ago. And then, of course, the mission of the organization, the teaching and the research that we do here, for people who are looking for a job that has purpose, you can't find a more, wonderful purpose to work for than at UC Berkeley.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. I believe very strongly in career ladders, in growing our own, in the retention of our best staff. It's what we do with faculty in both cases, and it's what we should be doing with staff. But I also have something of a different perspective to offer. When I first got to Smith, I spent the years before since I was at Berkeley in the 90s and Berkeley now, at Smith College, a women's college, liberal arts college in Northampton, Massachusetts. When I got there, I used to joke all the time about the Smith bubble, because the Smith community was mostly people who had worked there, both faculty and staff, for their whole lives. Came back to Berkeley and discovered there's a Berkeley bubble. And I never would have thought the things that I learned at Smith were helpful for Berkeley, but I use that knowledge all the time. And I think, your question says, how do you work on transition and success planning for an institution where it can take years to figure out how to get things done? There's something wrong with an institution that takes years to figure out how to get things done. And fresh blood is so helpful to an organization. I believe with all of Berkeley's distinction, we are too insular. We do not look enough to peers, to people who do things better than we do, in order to improve how we do things. And fresh blood in the workforce is one of the ways you do that.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. And around fresh blood in the workplace, one of the things that got written in when it comes to attracting staff and retaining staff, and I'm going to read this direct line because it's kind of interesting. In a thriving Barrie economy, our salaries lag the dramatically rising cost of living. And this can be a factor in hurting both existing staff and recruiting new talent who might opt for a higher compensation elsewhere. In addition to that, this Berkeley bubble, oftentimes we see staff that might stay for longer with smaller salaries because they're not sure how to leave and have that letters elsewhere, or might be staying for retirement benefits. 10 years in May. Never thought. So how do we retain the talented staff with these challenges, and how do we remain competitive as an employer? We mentioned some things, but I wonder if there was more to add.
I think this is fundamental to how we really address our budget challenges, because when you look at the financial constraints that we're under, it just really makes fewer tools available to us. But I think as we look at the ways in which we will have to reorganize the organization, one of the things that we'll have to do is to determine how we can create opportunities that allow us, particularly in an environment with revenue generation, to create a structure that has jobs that are well compensated. This is going to be a great challenge. And Carol, I don't know if you'd have anything to add on that, but it is fundamental to the challenges we have. And true, I would also say, for almost all public organizations, we are not unique in this. The public universities with which we compare ourselves, many of them have these very same kinds of challenges.
Yeah, I guess the perfect storm is the very high cost of living in the Bay Area. I mean, I shouldn't say cost of living, cost of housing in the Bay Area is a great challenge. It's a big challenge in our recruiting of faculty as well as our recruiting of staff.
I was thinking about our teams, and I think there's something that we can't overlook, which is sort of an insatiable desire to continue to learn. And that we are able to offer that at Berkeley, is being able to learn from each other, work with extremely talented teammates, and work with purpose, the belief in our Berkeley, and not only just protecting Berkeley, but watching Berkeley thrive into the future is something that, for my teammates, is highly motivating.
Thank you. And I see we're collecting some questions as well at this time, so please be sure, if you've written questions, to pass them to the ends of the aisle. There'll be some time very soon to answer those questions. Our next question is also continuing the theme of finances as well. At our last strategic update, there were certain units that were called out, such as athletics and student affairs, that were running operating losses, which contributed to our overall campus deficit. Can you update us on how these units' restructuring plans are coming along?
We are doing in-depth reviews, both financial and programmatic, of the units that have structural deficits. We just had a external review committee in for student affairs over the last 3 days. Similarly, we are doing an external review of real estate, and of course there's the Chancellor's Task Force on Athletics. So we're trying to give very particular focused attention both to the finances and to the programmatic and operating models of the units that are facing particular financial challenges. These financial challenges mean very different things than in different units. In some places, we may have a program that's too ambitious for the level of resources that we have committed to that area. In others, there may be chronic underfunding.
Or the way the units are organized.
Yes.
Thank you. Carol, you mentioned in the beginning the vacancies in the top management positions. And Rose, you mentioned the need sometimes to continue to make decisions in an efficient manner, keep those trains running, which I know we all appreciate. With these current vacancies in a lot of the top management positions, do anybody in the panel, do you feel that the lack of permanent leadership may be slowing us down from making these needed changes to improve the campus overall budget?
We simply don't have the luxury of delay. I think all of us feel that. And I certainly feel that as an interim. In fact, my position as an interim, I think, is oddly freeing because I'm not looking for another job. I don't, and feel that I am in a position to make some hard decisions that somebody that was continuing the position might find it harder to make.
I just want to absolutely echo that. I think that if you have a deep commitment to this institution, as Carol does, one of the things that you really want to do is make principled decisions, and I think we have to make them quickly, but we also have to make them transparently, because I think when I look at the last few years on the campus, I think there was a little bit of a disconnect between the leadership and a broad range of staff and even faculty on the campus. And I think one of the things I've heard you say, Carol, that I think is really quite critical is that we sort of have to reweave some of the fabric of our community as we're trying to make these decisions, so that all of us in the community can get behind the decisions that are made.
Mm-hmm. Earlier questions kind of address the area of productivity and efficiency. And for staff, sometimes this has meant layoffs or reorganizing units in a way that can be difficult. Can you provide insight into what cost-cutting initiatives the academic side of the house might be taking on?
The academic side of the house is under the same budgetary pressures as the non-academic side of the house, and they also have been doing a fair amount of reorganization of their staff. On the other hand, most of the revenue-producing opportunities for the campus are on the academic side of the house. And so some of the academic units will need to reorganize what their staff are doing, but invest in those revenue-producing opportunities. There are a number of very interesting conversations going on right now about some academic reorganizations, but they're driven more by intellectual urgency, data science, communications, than they are by cost cutting. And indeed, with taking more students as part of our revenue enhancing strategy, we shouldn't be shutting down academic programs.
The one thing that I might add, if you'll permit me, Carol, is that we've been having many conversations about what we're referring to as common goods.
Right.
And one of the things that I think is important to note, that while the revenue producing opportunities may be on the academic side of the house, we will have to be very clear that with our academic colleagues that the revenue will also have to support the common good
Right,
that actually
absolutely.
allows that revenue to be produced. So, and again, you know, it is that kind of way in which things have been optimized locally, and that is there's been kind of a long history that if you produce the revenue, you got to spend the revenue. And I think we have to really renegotiate that understanding so that people who are in an opportunity to generate revenue understand that there is a common good that has to be supported for any of this to work and hold together.
Yeah, it's one of the most complicated and interesting policy issues. The units do not all have the same revenue-producing opportunities. And we don't want a world in which the rich get richer and the poor get poorer among our academic units. So what is the right formula that maintains the incentives for units to go out and produce revenue, but also supports the common good? So that's something the deans are working on really carefully right now.
Our next question stays on this topic of budgets. And I'm into now the staff questions that you all just submitted via note cards. Thank you so much for turning those in. So this question is around how much of the anticipated 75 million annual savings have been realized by the changes we've made in operational excellence? And I'll add two more parts for this. How much does CSS save the campus per year? And do these savings reduce the budget deficit on the campus as a whole? Rose, if you want.
So that's a hard question
It's a
for me
hard
to
question.
answer, but I'll give it a shot. I think it is too early to measure the progress that we've made in operational excellence. Scott made a point earlier about it took longer than we would have liked to fully realize the structures and the systems that have brought us to this moment. And I think this 16-17 is the first year in which we're actually able to start measuring that. So we've had several years of investment, and now we're going to start measuring the return on investment. So that's something that next year I'll be able to answer with better clarity. So I don't think that we have experienced savings yet. We're just getting out of the investment phase. And there was the second part of the question. I'm sorry, Rebecca.
I might comment on the first
Sure.
part just very briefly, and that is we have a group of alums who we sometimes go to get advice about things that are happening on campus, and many of them have run large, complex public and private organizations. And all kinds of organizations are having to look at these shared service models. And so we had a meeting where there were about 5 people who had at corporations and at other kinds of public institutions had done this. And the one thing that was just absolutely consistent is that you have to invest more money than you imagine you will, and the returns come over a longer period of time than you often expect them to. The encouraging thing from that was a unanimous sense that it's important to stay the course and to continue to make the day-to-day improvements. And I think that ultimately these initiatives will lead to a more efficient and a more effective administrative system. But it does take longer, and it requires more investment than I think we probably imagined on the front end.
Yeah, and I think the way we'll experience it at Berkeley is cost avoidance rather than cost savings.
Yeah, agreed.
I think one of the parts of that question is going to have a similar answer.
Okay.
But it was, how much does CSS save the campus per year?
Same answer.
Yeah,
Yep.
not there yet.
Yeah, not there yet.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about the interim leadership positions on campus, and this question was about, is there any updates on what the status are for any of these searches?
Well, the chancellor search, as I'm sure you all know, is going on. The Office of the President hopes the regents will confirm an appointment by March. And we're holding off on the set of vice chancellorships and the provostship that would be, that are, interim people are holding those positions until the new chancellor is appointed, so that chancellor can shape his or her own leadership team. But we are moving forward with searches for some of the positions that are below that.
The other thing that I might add is I think on those searches that a new chancellor will have to initiate, we're trying to do as much of the the kind of groundwork so that when a new chancellor is appointed, those searches can be initiated as quickly and effectively as possible to eliminate the kind of long lead time that it takes for these cascading searches. And I think we can have an impact there.
Thank you. Rose, this is a question directed to you. Can you talk about some of the major drivers of our path to financial sustainability? I think we discussed some of those earlier, but if there's anything additional to add.
We talked about revenue generation. We are going to continue to look for opportunities to restructure our operation. And I know that that feels scary, but I think what we're trying to do is, in the example that we used earlier with, for instance, the internal and external review that we did with student affairs, what we found is that the services that we provide to our students are sort of sprinkled throughout 5 divisions, and does it make sense for us to sort of consolidate that into some operating units? So we're continuing that work. So I think that covers it.
If I can keep you in the hot seat again.
Oh, I'd love it.
One more for you. Can you talk about our budget target for the year? And when will we be at break even?
Yes, at great length. We have a budget target of a deficit of $110 million for the fiscal year 16-17. And we are very closely monitoring it. And I think this is a very important thing for staff to be aware of, that target is not set internally. That is a negotiated target with the Office of the President. And if we're unable to meet that target, then there are covenants that are attached to a debt restructuring agreement that we have with the Office of the President that are in jeopardy. So reaching the target is very important for us in terms of continuing to get support from the Office of the President. For fiscal year 17-18, we have a target of ending the year with an accumulated, a deficit, an in-year deficit of $56 million. So we're going to
significant decrease.
Very significant for 17-18, and I'm very candid about that. That I really think next year will be as hard or harder as this year was. We're currently on target, but we are monitoring that very, very, very carefully. We have adopted quarterly reporting. We're driving the deans and the CAOs and the divisional leadership bananas, asking them lots of questions, trying to anticipate how we're going to end the year. We're operating with the highest degree of clarity I believe Berkeley has ever operated in. We know where we are, and that's a big step forward for us, for a campus, rather than waiting until the 3rd or the 4th quarter and not knowing exactly what we're doing. The other thing that I think we're discovering along the way is that we don't always do the best job of anticipating all of our needs in the budgeting process. And so we're experiencing a lot of one-time asks, or we're reacting to emergency funding and learning about how we better incorporate that into our budget for 17-18.
Yeah, if I could just amplify what Rose has said. When I began the interim vice chancellor, executive vice chancellor, and provost position, I got this book that was pretty thick of off-cycle commitments that summed to many millions of dollars and many tens of millions of dollars. And we've gotten into a habit of on the campus of, if you have a need, well, you just come forward at that point to the provost or to Scott or to Rosemary or to the chancellor and ask for it. We cannot have a budget process that works that way. We have to put things in our yearly budget process and anticipate our needs.
This next question is kind of in that theme of next year being a difficult year. Is campus or CSS leadership planning for next round of layoffs? This had some dates in it as well, but I think I'll let the question stand.
Sure. I'm happy to speak to that because there are a couple of points that I think are worth making. The first is we're tracking very closely on what is happening with our position control because I think our first order of business is to avoid layoffs wherever we can by ensuring that we're capturing any positions that become vacant that might not be refilled. And again, that sort of falls into the category of doing more with less, but I have been extraordinarily impressed at every level of the organization in the ways that people are coming forward with ideas on how we can take vacant positions and capture them. And I think it's because everyone here, everyone on the staff, wants to avoid layoffs to the greatest degree possible. Having said all that, I think our challenges are significant enough that we have to continue to look at our staffing levels and take whatever actions will be necessary in order to meet the targets that, as Rose has described, are set for us externally. And so we will have to, again, use every tool in the toolbox. Having said all that, I think one of the things that we've come to recognize is that if we do those things in a completely top-down way, it will almost certainly be suboptimal and maybe do more harm than good. And so we're beginning to look at staffing levels with individual managers and beginning to ask questions about how we can do that. And even there, I think what we're discovering is that there may be more runway for us in using position control and capturing vacant positions so that layoffs, which right now we do not have a layoff plan, we do not have a layoff target, but that we can have create as much runway as possible so that if we ever do get to that point, it will be as small as it can possibly be. Carol, does that?
I think you said it well.
Yeah.
There was a part in that question also around CSS. I don't know, Peggy, if you had something to add as well about CSS leadership and considering layoffs, maybe especially when UC Path is implemented in CSS.
It's unknown right now, actually, the full impact of what UC Path will be, but that's like 2 years out. And we don't have any planned layoffs right now in CSS, but it is, as Scott said, also going to be determined on what is the budget situation as we go forward, and we have to continue to look at our staffing.
Thank you. So switching topics. This next question is especially prevalent, I think, this week. How will leadership address the ongoing issue of microaggressions and unconscious bias that can be perpetuated on staff of color, women, and other minority groups? We might even expand that to beyond staff as well, to our student, even our faculty populations.
One of the issues that I've become even more aware of since I came back to this position is how unfortunately prevalent faculty bullying is. And I'm very concerned about that, as is the Vice Provost, Ben Hermelin. We're trying to develop a policy that will have consequences for faculty who bully staff. So I think we have to look to our own house and make sure that our faculty are acting in the most responsible and considerate and empathetic way in relationship to both, in relationship to their colleagues, in relationship to students, and in relationship to staff. Our country, we started out saying something about this national moment in our country. This is a very difficult time for our country, in which divisions seem really raw. And I think we have to find ways of acting as a community in more compassionately, more empathetically. This committee that came in to review student affairs that I referred to before had an observation about the climate at Berkeley, which troubled me in part because I found it resonant and talked about it as a climate of the survival of the fittest. And that's not a kind of workplace that I really want to work in. And I think the issue with microaggressions, as you put it, or kinds of very subtle indications of bias, is that they're products of the culture of an institution. So yes, leadership can hopefully say the right things and set an example. But finally, you have to really work on the culture. And this is work that's never done. You can never say, oh, I've got that. That's really fine. Especially in a world like ours, in which you have new undergraduates coming in every year, new graduate students coming in every year, students at points in their own development maturation where they don't always make the wisest choices. They're learning how to be grown-ups. And so I think we should be doing a lot more talking than we're currently doing about culture, and not just at moments where there's an incident.
Thank you. So this is our last question, and then I'll be asking you to give any final words that any of you might have. So another switch of gears. Can anyone provide an update on what might be happening in real estate? I think that was identified as one of the revenue-generating initiatives earlier.
I'd love to say a little bit, and maybe Scott would like to say more. I've been chairing a task force on housing. This has been a wonderful experience because it's such a productive committee. We've been identifying building sites and prioritizing them. That task force will be ready to report in January. So I'm very excited about moving forward aggressively to try to develop our property. This will have, I think, wonderful effects on our community because it will increase the availability of housing. But housing can also be a revenue source, and so I'm really pleased with that.
The only thing that I would add is, I've now in the last few weeks gotten to understand that portfolio a little bit better, and I still have a great deal more to learn. But my initial impressions from working more closely with my colleagues in real estate, there are two large components. There's the facility services area, where there are many challenges, and I think the most significant challenges really come from years of underfunding, and I think we have to figure out how we're going to make some difficult trade-offs so that we all together can make decisions about how we move forward in that area. And then to the area that Carol was describing, we do have such good assets, and but each one, realizing the value of each of those assets requires a great deal of work. And so I think one of the things that this housing task force, I think, is going to contribute that is very meaningful is helping us to set some priorities. Because one of the things I'm hearing from my colleagues in real estate is that there are just too many ideas coming at them all at once, and we really need to begin to focus on a smaller number of ideas that can have impact and that we can hopefully begin to implement, so that as we get to the difficult 17-18 fiscal year, there may be some relief that will come from things that we can do in that area.
Thank you, and thank you all again for joining us. It was said yesterday by one of our great leaders that the worst thing that can happen in democracy, as well as an individual's life, is to become cynical about the future and lose hope. And I don't know about everyone listening or here in the room today, but I think your commitment to staff, your commitment to the pursuit and accessibility of education gives us all a great deal of hope. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I'll ask you for those final remarks. No pressure. Passing is allowed. But if any final words that you'd like to impart upon everyone today.
I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for everybody in this room, and thank you for anybody who may be listening online. You do such valuable work for the university. There is nothing that we could do here that doesn't depend on you. And over all my years at Berkeley, and I first joined the faculty in 1970, so that makes me ancient, is that I have recognized how creative, how imaginative, how hardworking, how dedicated, how smart our staff are. We have an outstanding staff, and I want to thank you for all of the work you do.
Thank you. Anyone else?
That says it for me.
You
That
can't,
says
you
it.
can't
I don't think I can top that.
We're doing ditto, ditto, ditto. That's fantastic. I will continue the theme of appreciation. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you to BSA for hosting this event.
Yes.
And to all of our staff. And also a special thank you to our interpreters.
Here, here.
Yes.
The fantastic artistry today. Thank you so much.